Commander Zexthara of the Vortanian Imperial Guard had seen many species rise and fall during his 3 centuries of service. His scaled hide bore the scars of 1,000 battles across the galaxy, each mark a testament to the superiority of the Galactic Dominion. Standing 8 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and eyes that could see across multiple spectrums, he was considered one of the finest military strategists in known space. The bridge of the dreadnought Inevitable Victory hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked all Dominion vessels. Holographic displays showed the positions of the Third Fleet as they approached what the primitives called the Milky Way. It was to be a routine conquest, the kind Zexthara had overseen dozens of times before. Intelligence reports indicated a young species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, still confined to a small cluster of systems around an unremarkable yellow star. Commander, his aide, Lieutenant Kavlos, approached with the familiar swagger of a junior officer eager to prove himself. The scouting reports from the human systems have arrived. Zexthara's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Humans. What an unimaginative name for a species. What do they call their homeworld? Earth, sir. Equally uninspired. The commander reviewed the data streams flowing across his personal display. Standard bipedal mammals, single-gendered reproduction, relatively short lifespan of less than a century. Their technology level was primitive by Dominion standards. No energy shields, kinetic weaponry instead of plasma systems, and their largest vessels were barely the size of a Dominion corvette. Population? Zexthara inquired, already calculating how many slave ships they would need. Approximately 12 billion across their home world and 17 colony systems, sir. They appear to have significant genetic and cultural diversity, which should make them excellent for the labor markets. Zexthara nodded approvingly. The Galactic Dominion had built its empire on the simple principle that might made right. Over the past millennium, they had absorbed over 300 species, each adding their unique capabilities to the collective strength of the empire. The Carillion hive minds served as perfect administrators, the crystalline Zephyrians excelled at energy manipulation, and the aquatic mollusks were unmatched engineers. Humans would simply be another entry in the great catalog of conquest. Resistance capabilities? The commander asked, though he expected the usual answer. Lieutenant Kavlos consulted his datapad. Minimal, sir. They possess nuclear weapons, but lack the delivery systems to threaten our fleet. Their space-based defenses consist mainly of orbital platforms with primitive missile systems. Intelligence estimates complete subjugation within 72 standard hours. The timeline seemed reasonable. Most species surrendered once they witnessed the full might of a Dominion battle fleet. Those who didn't were quickly convinced by a demonstration of orbital bombardment on a military target. It was an efficient system that had worked for centuries. Sir, the communications officer called out from his station, we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. Zexthara's eye stalks swiveled toward the officer. It was unusual for a primitive species to detect their approach so early, but not unheard of. Put it through. The main viewer flickered to life, revealing a human male in what appeared to be a military uniform. The creature was smaller than Zexthara had expected, perhaps 6 feet in height, with the pale skin tone common to many mammals. What surprised the commander was the complete lack of fear in the human's expression. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force, the human said, and Zexthara realized he had misidentified the gender. You are approaching Earth space in what appears to be a hostile formation. State your intentions. The translator's artificial voice carried no emotion, but something in the human's bearing suggested she was not merely posturing. Zexthara activated his own transmission system, allowing the aliens to see his imposing form. I am Commander Zexthara of the 3rd Conquest Fleet. You will surrender immediately and prepare your population for integration into the Galactic Dominion. Compliance will be rewarded with minimal casualties. The human admiral studied him for several long moments. I see. And if we refuse, then you'll be conquered by force, your military assets destroyed, and your population enslaved. This is not a negotiation, human. This is an inevitability. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. I understand your position, Commander Zexthara. However, I must inform you that humanity respectfully declines your generous offer. The audacity of the statement caught Zexthara off guard. In 3 centuries, only a handful of species had outright rejected the Dominion's terms, and they had all been considerably more advanced than these humans appear to be. You misunderstand your situation, Zexthara replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. My fleet consists of over 500 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts. Your entire space force could not challenge a single one of our ships. Perhaps, Admiral Chun said, and for just a moment, Zexthara thought he detected something that might have been amusement. But you're operating under some incorrect assumptions about humanity. Enlighten me. You assume that our behavior will follow the same patterns as other species you've encountered. You assume that we'll calculate the odds, realize we cannot win, and surrender to preserve our lives. Zexthara felt a slight unease growing in his chest, though he couldn't identify why. Those are logical assumptions based on self-preservation instincts common to all sentient life. Admiral Chun smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than any threat could have been. Commander, has your intelligence informed you about human history? We know you're a young species with a tendency toward tribal conflicts. This actually makes integration easier, as you lack unity. Tribal conflicts, the Admiral repeated. Is that what you call 5,000 years of continuous warfare? Commander, in the time your species has been building this galactic empire, humanity has fought approximately 15,000 significant military conflicts on our home world alone. Zexthara's mandibles clicked nervously. Impossible. Such a level of constant warfare would have prevented technological development. On the contrary, it accelerated it. Every weapon we've ever built, every strategy we've developed, every innovation we've made has been tested in battle against our own kind. We've fought wars in every environment our planet offers. Land, sea, air, underground, in Arctic conditions, tropical jungles, burning deserts, and urban centers containing millions of civilians. The human admiral leaned forward slightly. You mentioned that other species calculate odds and surrender when faced with overwhelming force. But, you see, Commander, humans have a saying, nobody fights like family. We've spent millennia perfecting the art of killing each other, and we've gotten very, very good at it. Lieutenant Kavlos stepped closer to Zexthara. Sir, should I order the fleet to advance? This conversation serves no purpose. But Zexthara held up one of his hands. Something was wrong. The human's confidence wasn't the bluster of a primitive species trying to intimidate a superior force. It felt genuine, and that worried him. Admiral Chun, you speak as if your internal conflicts somehow prepare you to face the Galactic Dominion. We have conquered species far more advanced than your own. I'm sure you have, she replied. But tell me, how many of those species had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting each other? How many had developed warfare as their primary cultural driving force? Zexthara accessed the conquest database in his mind, searching through the records of hundreds of successful campaigns. The Crystalline Collective had been peaceful until attacked. The Mollusk Confederation had been scientists and explorers. The Carillion hive mind had been internally unified for millennia. None of them had been warriors by nature. Our preliminary scans suggest you lack the industrial capacity to sustain a prolonged conflict, Zexthara said, though his certainty was beginning to waver. Admiral Chen's smile widened. Commander, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States possessed a smaller navy than many of our current corporate security forces. For years later, we had built the largest military machine in our planet's history and developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities. When we commit to war, we don't just fight with what we have. We transform our entire civilization into a weapon. Your species' history is irrelevant when facing modern space-based warfare, Zexthara insisted. Is it? The Admiral touched something on her console, and the transmission split to show multiple views. Zextaraz's eyes widened as he saw what appeared to be massive construction yards in the asteroid fields of the human system. Spacecraft emerging from what he had thought were mining operations, and weapon platforms that had somehow been missed by Dominion scouts. You see, Commander, while your scouts were cataloging our official military assets, they missed something important. Humans don't separate civilian and military infrastructure the way other species do. Every mining platform can be a weapons platform. Every transport ship can be a warship. Every factory can produce instruments of war. Zextaraz's tactical displays suddenly erupted with new contacts. Ships were emerging from asteroid belts, gas giant clouds, and what had appeared to be empty space. The human fleet wasn't the small collection of primitive vessels his intelligence had reported. It was everywhere. "How many ships do you have?" Zextaraz demanded. "We stopped counting at 10,000, Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Commander, your species has built a beautiful empire based on the assumption that warfare is an aberration, something civilized beings only resort to when necessary. You've forgotten that for some species, war isn't something we do. It's something we are." The tactical officer's voice cracked as he called out, "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. They're powering weapons we didn't know existed." Zextaraz stared at the human admiral, finally understanding the trap they had flown into. "This was planned. You knew we were coming." "For 6 months," Admiral Chen confirmed. "Your scouts weren't as stealthy as they thought. We've been preparing for this moment since we first detected your advanced forces. Impossible. Our stealth technology is centuries ahead of your detection capabilities. Your stealth technology is designed to hide from sensors built by peaceful species," the Admiral corrected. "Humans have spent thousands of years developing ways to detect enemies who don't want to be found. Paranoia is one of our greatest survival traits." Zextaraz's mind raced through the tactical situation. His 500 ships were now surrounded by an enemy force 20 times their size, in a system the humans knew intimately, while his forces were operating blind. "You cannot possibly believe you can defeat the entire Galactic Dominion," he said, grasping for some psychological advantage. Admiral Chen's expression grew serious for the first time. "Commander, let me tell you about something we call the human doctrine. When someone attacks us, we don't just defend ourselves. We don't just fight back. We make it impossible for them to ever attack anyone again." The main display shifted to show historical footage that Zextaraz's translator identified as being from human conflicts. Cities reduced to rubble, massive military formations, weapons of incredible destruction. When the Axis powers started a global war in 1939, they thought they were fighting for territory and resources, Admiral Chen narrated. By 1945, their entire civilization had been dismantled and rebuilt according to the victor's specifications. When terrorists attacked our cities in 2001, they thought they were making a political statement. 20 years later, their entire organizational structure had been hunted to extinction. Zextaraz felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine fear. "The Dominion will send more fleets," he said. "Larger ones. You cannot fight the entire galaxy." "Can't we?" Admiral Chen asked. "Commander, you've made 2 critical errors in your assessment of humanity. First, you assumed we would fight like the other species you've conquered. Second, you assumed we would fight alone." The transmission split again, showing new faces. Zextaraz recognized some of them from intelligence reports. Leaders of species that had refused Dominion integration, rebels from conquered worlds, even what appeared to be Dominion military officers. "You see, Commander, while you were building an empire based on fear and subjugation, we were building something else. We were making friends." The tactical display exploded with new contacts as ships began emerging from hyperspace throughout the system. Vessels of dozens of different designs, representing species Zextaraz recognized, and many he didn't. "The Resistance Coalition," Admiral Chen announced, "has been growing for quite some time. We just gave them a reason to come out of the shadows." Zextaraz's communications officer reported frantically, "Sir, we're receiving surrender demands from multiple sources." The humans aren't just asking for our surrender. They're demanding the immediate cessation of all Dominion conquest activities and the beginning of liberation operations for subjugated species. The magnitude of the catastrophe began to sink in. This wasn't just a failed conquest. This was the beginning of the end of everything the Dominion had built. "This is impossible," Zextharal whispered. "One primitive species cannot undo 1,000 years of galactic order." Admiral Chun leaned back in her chair, and for the first time, Zexthara saw something like sympathy in her expression. "Commander, let me leave you with one final thought about humans. We don't just fight wars to win them. We fight wars to make sure they never have to be fought again. The Galactic Dominion ends today, not because we destroyed it, but because we're offering something better." The transmission cut to black, leaving Zexthara staring at his own reflection in the dark screen. Around him, his officers awaited orders that he no longer knew how to give. The galaxy would never be the same. The silence on the bridge of the inevitable victory stretched for what felt like an eternity. Zexthara's 4 hands moved across his command console, pulling up tactical displays that painted an increasingly grim picture. The human fleet had not only surrounded them, but had achieved something the Dominion had never encountered: technological superiority through sheer innovation born of desperation and conflict. "Sir," Lieutenant Kavlos ventured, his voice barely above a whisper, "your orders?" Zexthara studied the energy readings coming from the human vessels. Their power signatures were unlike anything in the Dominion database. Where Dominion technology had evolved through centuries of refining proven concepts, human technology appeared to be a chaotic fusion of desperate innovation and ruthless efficiency. "Communications, establish a fleet-wide channel," Zexthara commanded, his voice steady despite the uncertainty clawing at his chest. "All ships maintain defensive positions. Do not power weapon systems. We need to assess the situation before we act." The communications officer, a nervous Carillion named Hive, Node 7742, transmitted the orders across the fleet. Within moments, responses began flooding in from the other ships. Captain Mordex of the heavy cruiser Domination's Edge was demanding permission to engage. Admiral Krestova of the Dreadnought Squadron wanted clarification of the tactical situation. A dozen other voices added to the chaos. "Silence," Zexthara commanded, and the channel fell quiet. "We are dealing with an unprecedented situation. The humans have demonstrated capabilities far beyond our intelligence estimates. Until we understand exactly what we're facing, we will observe and gather data." Through the viewport, Zexthara could see human vessels moving with a precision that defied their apparent technological limitations. Their formations were unlike anything in Dominion tactical doctrine, seeming to flow like living organisms rather than following the rigid geometric patterns that define proper military organization. "Tactical analysis," he ordered his senior strategy officer, a mollusk named Gerblex, whose underwater evolution had gifted his species with exceptional 3-dimensional thinking. Gerblex's tentacles danced over his console, his beak-like mouth clicking as he processed information. "Commander, the human formations appear chaotic, but there's an underlying mathematical sophistication that's disturbing. They're not following any known tactical doctrine, yet their positioning creates overlapping fields of fire that would make any assault extremely costly. Their weapons, unknown configurations. Energy readings suggest a mix of technologies that shouldn't be compatible, yet somehow they've integrated them seamlessly. It's as if they've taken every theoretical weapons concept and found ways to make them practical." Zexthara accessed his personal database on conquered species. The pattern had always been the same: initial contact, demonstration of superior force, surrender, or quick defeat, integration. The Dominion's success had been built on the psychological impact of overwhelming technological superiority. Primitive species would see their energy shields, plasma weapons, and massive ships and immediately understand the futility of resistance. But these humans had not only refused to be intimidated, they had somehow matched the Dominion's technological advantages. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a new transmission. Not from the humans this time. The main viewer activated, revealing a face that sent a chill through Zextara's exoskeleton. It was Subcommander Veltar of the 8th Conquest Fleet, but something was wrong with the transmission. The background wasn't the familiar interior of a Dominion vessel. Commander Zextara, Veltar said, and his voice carried a weight of exhaustion and defeat. I'm transmitting from the human vessel Defiance. The 8th Fleet. The 8th Fleet no longer exists. Murmurs of shock rippled across the bridge. The 8th Fleet had been dispatched to secure the outer human colonies weeks ago. If Veltar was correct. Explain, Zextara commanded. Veltar's image flickered as he looked off camera before continuing. The humans were waiting for us at Proxima Centauri. They didn't just have ships, Commander. They had turned the entire system into a weapon. Asteroid bases with enough firepower to cripple dreadnoughts. Ships that could somehow phase in and out of normal space. And tactics. The subcommander paused, running a hand through what remained of his cranial ridges. Commander, they don't fight like any species we've encountered. They don't try to minimize casualties or preserve infrastructure. They fight like demons. Impossible, Lieutenant Cablos interjected. The 8th Fleet consisted of over 200 vessels, including 4 dreadnoughts. No primitive species could. They're not primitive. Veltar's voice cracked with emotion. That's what we thought, what our intelligence told us, but we were wrong. They've been preparing for us for decades. Maybe longer. Every human colony we've scouted, every outpost we thought was defenseless, it was a trap. All of it was a trap. Zextara felt the familiar sensation of a tactical situation slipping beyond his control. Subcommander, provide tactical details. What weapons capabilities do they possess? Everything, sir. Everything we have and things we don't. I watched them destroy the dreadnought Imperial Might with weapons that seemed to bend space itself. I saw fighters that moved like they were alive, anticipating our targeting systems before we even fired. And their boarding tactics, Veltar shuddered visibly. Commander, humans don't just fight to win. They fight to terrorize. They want their enemies to fear them so much that future conflicts become unnecessary. I've never seen anything like what they did to the ships they captured. The transmission shifted to show the interior of what had clearly been a Dominion vessel. But the familiar corridors had been transformed into something resembling a battlefield medical station. Wounded Dominion soldiers lay on improvised beds, being tended by human medical personnel. They're treating our wounded, Veltar continued, providing medical care better than our own field hospitals could manage. But they're also recording everything. Every soldier they've captured is being interviewed, documented, and somehow convinced to provide information about Dominion military doctrine. Zextara's tactical mind began to process the implications. Psychological warfare. It goes deeper than that, sir. They're not just trying to demoralize us. They're learning from us. Every engagement teaches them more about how the Dominion fights, how we think, how we organize. They're adapting faster than any species should be able to. A new voice joined the transmission. Unmistakably human, but speaking fluent Dominion standard. Commander Zextara, this is Captain Rodriguez of the Human Coalition Forces. Subcommander Veltar has requested permission to address his superior officers regarding the current situation. Zextara found himself staring at another human face, this one bearing the kind of casual confidence that spoke of complete control over the situation. You're holding him prisoner. Actually, no, Captain Rodriguez replied. Subcommander Veltar and the survivors of his fleet have been granted temporary asylum while they consider their options. We've found that most Dominion soldiers, when given accurate information about their empire's activities, choose to defect rather than continue fighting for a cause they no longer believe in. Impossible, Zextara said. Dominion loyalty is absolute. Captain Rodriguez smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. Commander, let me ask you something. How much do you actually know about the species your empire has integrated over the past 1,000 years? The question caught Zextara off guard. We have comprehensive databases on all member species. Do you? When was the last time you spoke directly with a Carillion individual rather than a hive node? When did you last see a Zephyrian crystal garden that wasn't being strip mined for industrial materials? Have you ever visited a mollusk city that still exists underwater instead of being drained for the convenience of Dominion administrators? Each question hit like a physical blow. Zextera realized he had no answers. His understanding of the Empire's member species came entirely from official reports and tactical briefings. Your Empire, Captain Rodriguez continued, has been built on a lie. The lie that superior technology automatically confers the right to rule. The lie that integration is different from conquest. The lie that the species you've absorbed have benefited from Dominion membership. The transmission split to show images that Zextera had never seen before. Carillion individuals separated from their hive minds, struggling with concepts their collective consciousness had never needed to address. Zephyrian crystals forced to live in environments that slowly poisoned their crystalline matrix. Mollusk forced to adapt to air breathing while their ocean cities were systematically destroyed. The Resistance Coalition, Captain Rodriguez explained, isn't just about defeating the Dominion militarily. It's about showing every species in the galaxy what they lost when your Empire saved them from their primitive existence. Subcommander Veltar spoke again, his voice heavy with what Zextera recognized as guilt. Commander, they showed us the real history. What the Dominion actually did to conquered species. What we did. I've been fighting for an empire that turned unique civilizations into slave labor forces. Subcommander, you are clearly under the influence of enemy psychological manipulation, Zextera said, but even as the words left his mouth, he felt uncertainty growing in his mind. Am I? Veltar asked. Commander, when was the last time you saw a Carillion choose their own path instead of following high directives? When did you last encounter a Zephyrian pursuing art or philosophy instead of industrial tasks? These species had their own cultures, their own dreams, their own purposes before we liberated them. Captain Rodriguez added, Commander Zextera, we're going to show you something. Video logs from your own ship's archives, records of first contact with various species, unedited communications from the early days of Dominion expansion. We're not asking you to take our word for anything. We're asking you to look at your own history. The main display shifted to show what appeared to be Dominion records from centuries past. Zextera watched as first contact scenarios played out, seeing patterns he had never noticed before. Species that had been described as primitive and warlike were shown living in complex civilizations with their own forms of art, science, and social organization. Then came the conquest footage, the liberation that followed Dominion victory. The systematic dismantling of cultural institutions, the reorganization of society to serve Dominion needs, the gradual erasure of individual species' identity in favor of functional categories. This is propaganda, Zextera said, but his voice lacked conviction. Enemy manipulation of historical records. These are your own archives, Commander, Captain Rodriguez replied. Authenticated Dominion records from your own ship's databases. We haven't altered anything. We've simply organized the information in ways your Empire preferred not to examine. Lieutenant Kavlos stepped closer to Zextera. Sir, this could be sophisticated psychological warfare designed to undermine our morale. Could be, Zextera agreed, but he was studying the tactical displays with new eyes. The human formations weren't just militarily effective. They were organized to accommodate the different capabilities and preferences of dozens of species. Ships designed for aquatic species flew alongside others built for crystalline entities and energy beings. It wasn't just an alliance of convenience. It was a genuine coalition of different civilizations working together. Commander, Captain Rodriguez said, we're going to make you an offer, not surrender. We understand that would be unacceptable to an officer of your standing. But we propose a temporary ceasefire while you review the evidence we've presented. And if I refuse, then we'll proceed with the liberation of your fleet, the human replied matter-of-factly. We've developed quite effective methods for disabling Dominion vessels without destroying them. Your crews will be given the same choice we've offered Subcommander Veltar. Examine the evidence and decide for themselves whether they wish to continue fighting for the Galactic Dominion. Zexthara looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. He saw doubt in their expressions, questions they had never been encouraged to ask. For the first time in 3 centuries of military service, he found himself uncertain about the righteousness of his cause. "How long?" he asked. 12 standard hours, Captain Rodriguez replied. "Enough time to review the materials and make an informed decision." Zexthara studied the tactical display one more time. His fleet was surrounded, outgunned, and facing an enemy that appeared to know more about Dominion capabilities than the Dominion knew about theirs. Even if he ordered an attack, the likelihood of achieving anything beyond his own destruction was minimal. 12 hours, he agreed. But understand, human, that a ceasefire is not a surrender. Captain Rodriguez nodded. "Understood, Commander. Use the time well." As the transmission ended, Zexthara found himself staring at his own reflection in the blank screen, wondering for the first time in his life whether everything he had believed about the galaxy was wrong. The 12 hours of ceasefire passed like a nightmare of revelation. Zexthara had dismissed his bridge crew to their quarters, keeping only essential personnel on duty while he sequestered himself in his private command chamber. The humans had transmitted terabytes of data, all authenticated Dominion records as promised, but organized in ways that revealed patterns the Empire had spent centuries hiding from itself. The first revelation had been the most devastating. The Dominion's own first contact protocols explicitly called for the systematic destruction of indigenous cultural institutions. What Zexthara had been taught was liberation was actually a carefully planned program of cultural genocide designed to create compliant worker populations. Document after document painted the same picture. The Carillion hive minds hadn't been naturally collective. They had been individual intelligences forcibly merged into group consciousness to make them easier to control. The crystalline Zephyrians had once been artists and philosophers who viewed their crystal formations as living art. The Dominion had reduced them to industrial workers whose only function was to grow materials for construction projects. The mollusk records were perhaps the most disturbing. Their underwater cities had been engineering marvels that worked in harmony with their ocean environments. The Dominion had forced them onto land-based platforms, slowly poisoning them with atmospheric gases while their homeworlds were strip-mined for resources. But it was the personal testimonies that truly broke something inside Zexthara's worldview. Individual Carillions describing the moment they were forced into hive consciousness, losing their personal identity forever. Zephyrian artists whose final crystal poems were archived just before they were reprogrammed into industrial units. Mollusk engineers who had been forced to watch their cities drained and destroyed, then ordered to build the machinery that would prevent other species from suffering the same fate. "Sir," came a voice from his doorcom. Lieutenant Kavlos sounded uncertain. "The crew is requesting permission to assemble for briefing." Zexthara had been dreading this moment. "Enter." Kavlos stepped into the chamber, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious confusion. "Sir, the humans have transmitted the same data packages to every ship in the fleet. The crew has been discussing the contents. And their conclusions? Mixed, sir. Some are calling it enemy propaganda. Others are asking questions I don't know how to answer." Kavlos paused, clearly struggling with something. "Sir, I've been reviewing the records for my own homeworld's integration. The official history doesn't match what's in these files." Zexthara studied his aide, seeing his own crisis of faith reflected in the younger officer's eyes. "What do you remember about first contact with the Dominion?" "The standard story, sir. My people were trapped in primitive tribal conflicts, destroying our environment through inefficient resource management. The Dominion arrived to offer peace and technological advancement. And what do the records show?" Kavlos's voice became barely audible. "My people had achieved a sustainable global civilization. No major conflicts for over 2 centuries. Advanced biotechnology that worked with our ecosystem instead of against it. The tribal conflicts They began after Dominion advisors arrived and started reorganizing our society for maximum resource extraction efficiency. The weight of 3 centuries of lies was crushing. Zexthra activated his command console and opened a fleet-wide channel. All personnel, this is Commander Zexthra. Report to your respective assembly areas for briefing. We need to discuss the current situation. Within an hour, Zexthra found himself standing before his senior staff in the main conference chamber. The faces looking back at him represented a dozen different species, all wearing expressions of confusion, anger, and betrayal. I have reviewed the materials provided by the human forces, Zexthra began. I cannot conclusively determine whether they represent enemy psychological warfare or authentic historical records. However, I can confirm that the authentication codes match Dominion standards, and the documents appear to be genuine. Captain Mordex of the Dominations, Edge, spoke first. Commander, even if these records are authentic, they represent ancient history. The modern Dominion has evolved beyond the crude policies of our predecessors. Has it? The question came from Chief Engineer Vixandra, a mollusk who rarely spoke during command meetings. Her aquatic voice carried through the chamber's environmental speakers. Captain, when was the last time you saw a mollusk who had a choice about their assignment? When did you last encounter a Carillion who could exist outside their hive mind? Mordex's mandibles clicked in irritation. The hive mind integration was voluntary. The Carillions requested it to improve their social efficiency. Did they? Vixandra's tentacles moved in patterns that Zexthra's translator identified as equivalent to bitter laughter. Or were they told it was voluntary after their individual consciousness centers were already damaged by accidental neural disruption fields? The conference chamber fell silent. Zexthra realized that many of his officers had never actually questioned the official histories they had been taught. The Dominion's success depended on each species believing that their integration had been beneficial and voluntary. The point, Zexthra said, struggling to maintain command authority, is that we must now decide our course of action based on current realities, not historical interpretations. With respect, sir, came a new voice. Zexthra turned to see Subcommander Relneth, a Zephyrian whose crystalline structure had been modified for military service. The historical interpretations explain why we're currently surrounded by a coalition of species we thought were grateful for Dominion protection. Relneth's crystal body pulsed with colors that Zexthra's enhanced vision identified as deep sadness mixed with anger. Sir, I've been analyzing the human vessel configurations. They're using Carillion hive coordination systems, but modified to preserve individual identity. They've incorporated Zephyrian crystal growth technology, but designed to create art as well as functional materials. They've adapted mollusk engineering principles while maintaining aquatic environment compatibility. Your point, Subcommander? They haven't just allied with our enemies, sir. They've given them back what we took away. The Carillions in the human fleet can choose when to join the hive mind and when to think independently. The Zephyrians are growing crystal gardens alongside weapon systems. The mollusk are designing ships that can function in both air and water environments. The implications hit Zexthra like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just created a military alliance. They had somehow reversed centuries of forced cultural adaptation. Species that the Dominion had molded into specialized tools had been restored to their original diversity while retaining the technological advantages they had gained. That's impossible, Captain Mordex insisted. The integration processes were irreversible. Cultural patterns, once modified, cannot be restored. Can't they? Chief Engineer Vixandra moved to the chamber's central display and activated a projection showing the human fleet formations. Look at the ship designs, Captain. They're not just functional, they're beautiful. When was the last time you saw a Dominion vessel designed for aesthetic appeal instead of pure efficiency? The display shifted to show detailed scans of individual human vessels. Zexthra found himself staring at ships that seemed to blend technology with art, hull configurations that served both defensive and decorative purposes, weapon systems that were somehow elegant as well as deadly. The humans, Vixandra continued, have remembered something the Dominion forgot. Technology should serve life, not the other way around. These ships aren't just tools of war. They're expressions of the cultures that built them. Lieutenant Kavlos stepped forward. Sir, I've been analyzing the tactical situation. Even if we wanted to fight, our chances of success are essentially zero. The human forces outnumber us 20 to 1. They know our capabilities better than we know theirs, and they're fighting for something more powerful than military orders. Which is the right to be themselves, sir. Every species in that coalition is fighting to reclaim what the Dominion took from them. We're not just facing enemy soldiers. We're facing the combined anger of 300 species that have realized they were lied to for centuries. The chamber erupted in discussion as officers began debating among themselves. Some argued for fighting to the death rather than accepting defeat. Others questioned whether the Dominion they had served actually deserved their loyalty. A few, like Vixandra, seemed to be considering the possibility that the humans were offering something better than what they had known. Silence, Zexthara commanded, and the chamber fell quiet. We have a decision to make. Not just about this battle, but about the future of the galaxy. He activated his personal datapad and displayed the communication he had received from Admiral Chun an hour earlier. The humans have made us an offer. Not surrender, but what they call transition assistance. They're proposing to help Dominion forces and civilian populations adapt to what they term a post-imperial galaxy. What does that mean? Mordex demanded. It means, Zexthara replied, reading from the message, that every species would be free to choose their own path. Former Dominion soldiers would be offered opportunities to serve in the Coalition Defense Forces, but only if they wanted to. Civilian populations would receive assistance in rebuilding their cultural institutions, and worlds that have been strip-mined or environmentally damaged would receive ecological restoration support. The silence that followed was different from before. Instead of shock or confusion, it carried a weight of possibility that none of them had previously considered. Subcommander Relneth's crystal structure pulsed with what Zexthara recognized as hope. Sir, they're offering to let us remember who we were before we became Imperial soldiers. Some of us might not like what we remember, Captain Mordex said quietly. Perhaps, Vixandra agreed, but at least we would have the choice to remember. Zexthara looked around the chamber at faces that had served the Dominion faithfully for decades or centuries. Many of them were seeing possibilities they had never imagined. Others were clinging to the only system they had ever known. The ceasefire ends in 2 hours, Zexthara announced. Each ship's captain will consult with their crew and make their own decision. I will not order anyone to abandon their loyalty to the Dominion, nor will I prevent anyone from choosing a different path. As his officers filed out of the chamber, Zexthara remained behind, staring at the tactical display showing the human fleet. For the first time in his life, he found himself wondering not whether he could win a battle, but whether he wanted to. The galaxy was changing, and the old certainties were crumbling. Soon, he would have to decide which future he wanted to help create. The final hour of ceasefire brought a stream of reports that painted a picture of an empire in collapse. Ship after ship from Zexthara's fleet was requesting permission to negotiate separate terms with the human coalition. The heavy cruiser Eternal Glory had already lowered its shields and accepted human inspection teams. 2 destroyer squadrons had announced their intention to defect. Even the dreadnought Imperial Supremacy was reporting crew mutinies and requests for asylum. Zexthara stood alone on his bridge, having dismissed all but essential personnel. Through the viewport, he could see human ships moving in precise formations, but there was something almost gentle about their approach. They weren't positioning for an attack. They were arranging themselves as escorts, as if preparing to guide the Dominion vessels to safety rather than destroy them. Sir, came the voice of his communications officer, one of the few crew members who had chosen to remain at their posts. We're receiving a priority transmission from Dominion High Command. Zexthara felt his stomach clench. Put it through. The main viewer activated to reveal the imposing figure of Supreme Admiral Kexthul, the Dominion's highest military authority. His reptilian features were twisted with rage, and his ceremonial armor gleamed with the symbols of absolute power. Commander Zexthara, Kexthul's voice carried the weight of imperial authority. Explain why the Third Fleet has failed to complete its conquest objectives. Supreme Admiral, the tactical situation has proven more complex than initial intelligence suggested. Complex. Kexthul's roar echoed through the bridge. A primitive species with barely adequate space travel has somehow neutralized 500 of our finest ships? This is unacceptable incompetence. Zexthara chose his words carefully. Sir, the humans have demonstrated capabilities far beyond our projections. They've also formed a coalition with rebel forces from multiple species. The tactical environment is unlike anything in our databases. Then, destroy them all, Kexthul commanded. Use whatever force is necessary. The Dominion will not be humiliated by primitives. Supreme Admiral, they're offering terms for peaceful resolution. I care nothing for their terms. The Supreme Admiral's image leaned forward, his eyes blazing with fury. Commander, you will immediately commence full-scale assault operations. Every human ship is to be destroyed. Every human world is to be reduced to radioactive ash. The galaxy must understand that defying the Dominion brings only annihilation. Zexthara felt something cold settle in his chest. In all his years of service, he had never heard such absolute hatred in a superior officer's voice. Sir, there are billions of civilians in the human systems. Surely evacuation protocols, no evacuations, no prisoners, no survivors. Kexthul's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. This rebellion ends today, Commander, either by human blood or by your own. The transmission cut to black, leaving Zexthara staring at his reflection in the dead screen. For 3 centuries, he had followed orders without question, believing that the Dominion represented order and civilization in a chaotic galaxy. But the creature he had just spoken with seemed more like a rabid beast than a civilized leader. Sir, his communications officer said quietly, the human Admiral Chun is requesting permission to speak with you. Zexthara nodded, and moments later the familiar face of Admiral Chun appeared on his screen. But this time, her expression was grave with an urgency he hadn't seen before. Commander Zexthara, we've intercepted your communication with Dominion High Command. We need to talk immediately. Admiral, I'm afraid I cannot. Commander, listen to me, Admiral Chen interrupted. 3 hours ago, we detected massive fleet movements from the Dominion core worlds. Supreme Admiral Kexthul has ordered the complete extermination of humanity and all allied species. 60,000 ships are currently en route to human space, carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. The magnitude of the number hit Zexthara like a physical blow. Impossible. The Dominion has never authorized planetary extermination on that scale. They have now, Admiral Chun replied grimly. Our intelligence networks within the Dominion hierarchy have confirmed it. Any world that has shown sympathy for human or rebel causes is marked for destruction. That includes several hundred planets with populations totaling over 50 billion beings. Zexthara's tactical mind began processing the implications. You're suggesting the Dominion intends to commit genocide on a galactic scale. Not suggesting, Commander. Stating fact. We have the orders authenticated and verified. The Dominion leadership has decided that maintaining control is worth exterminating a significant portion of the galaxy's population. The bridge fell silent as the communication officer and the few remaining crew members absorbed what they had just heard. Zexthara found himself remembering the personal testimonies he had reviewed during the ceasefire. Individual beings whose cultures and civilizations had been systematically destroyed by Dominion policy. Now, the Empire was planning to finish what it had started. Admiral, Zexthara said slowly, what are you asking of me? Help us stop them, Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. Commander, you know Dominion tactical doctrine better than anyone outside their highest command levels. You understand their strategic thinking, their operational patterns, their technological capabilities. Without that knowledge, we might not be able to prevent the genocide they're planning. You're asking me to betray everything I've sworn to protect. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. Commander, I'm asking you to remember what you originally swore to protect. When you first entered military service, did you pledge to serve an empire that would murder billions of innocent beings to maintain its power? Or did you pledge to serve something greater? Peace, order, the protection of civilized life. Zexthara closed his eyes, remembering his commissioning ceremony 3 centuries ago. He had been young, idealistic, believing that he was joining a force for galactic stability and progress. The words of his oath echoed in his memory: to serve the cause of peace and order throughout the galaxy, to protect the innocent and defend civilization against chaos. When had those words been twisted into justification for systematic oppression and mass murder? Commander, Admiral Chun continued, we've been monitoring communications from your fleet. Several of your ships have already made their choice. But we need more than individual defections. We need someone who understands Dominion strategy well enough to help coordinate an effective defense. Zexthara opened his eyes and looked around his bridge. The few crew members present were watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. These beings had served under him for years, trusting his judgment and following his orders. What kind of future was he leading them toward? If I were to consider your proposal, Zexthara said carefully, what guarantees could you offer for the safety of my crew? Full protection under coalition law, Admiral Chen replied immediately. Medical care, relocation assistance, and the option to serve in coalition forces or return to civilian life. We're not asking anyone to abandon their principles. We're asking them to choose which principles they want to serve. Through the viewport, Zexthara could see more Dominion ships lowering their shields and accepting human escort. The empire he had served was dissolving around him, replaced by something he didn't fully understand but which seemed to offer hope instead of fear. Admiral, he said finally, I need to consult with my senior staff. Of course, Commander. But please understand, the Dominion extermination fleet will reach human space in 18 hours. If we're going to mount an effective defense, we need to begin preparations immediately. The transmission ended, leaving Zexthara alone with his thoughts and the weight of the most important decision of his life. He activated his personal communicator and called his senior staff back to the bridge. Within minutes, the familiar faces were assembled before him again. But everything had changed since their last meeting. The evidence of Dominion historical crimes had shaken their faith in the Empire. The Supreme Admiral's genocidal orders had horrified them, and Admiral Chen's offer represented a possibility none of them had previously imagined. The situation has evolved, Zexthara announced. Supreme Admiral Kexthal has ordered the complete extermination of humanity and all allied species. 60,000 ships are en route to carry out planetary sterilization operations. Captain Mordex's mandibles clicked in shock. Planetary sterilization? That's a violation of every treaty and convention the Dominion has ever signed. Apparently, Subcommander Relneth said, his crystalline structure pulsing with patterns of distress, the Dominion leadership considers treaties irrelevant when faced with threats to their power. Chief Engineer Vixandra moved closer to the central display. Sir, if they're willing to commit genocide to maintain control, what does that say about everything else we've been told about Dominion values and principles? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Zexthara looked at each of his officers in turn, seeing his own crisis of conscience reflected in their expressions. The humans have offered us a choice, he said finally. We can remain loyal to an empire that has decided to solve its problems through mass murder, or we can stand against genocide and help protect innocent life. Lieutenant Kavlos stepped forward. Sir, if we choose to resist, we'll be branded as traitors. There will be no going back to our previous lives. And if we choose to participate in genocide, Vixandra replied, There will be no living with ourselves afterward. The debate that followed was unlike any military discussion Zexthera had ever experienced. Instead of tactical considerations and strategic objectives, his officers were grappling with fundamental questions about right and wrong, duty and conscience, loyalty and justice. In the end, the decision was unanimous. Communications, Zexthera commanded, open a channel to Admiral Chun. The human admiral appeared on screen with obvious relief. Commander, have you reached a decision? Admiral Chun, Zexthera said, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of conditioning falling away. The Third Fleet places itself at your disposal. We will help you stop the genocide, no matter the cost. Admiral Chun smiled, and for the first time, Zexthera saw not an enemy commander, but a fellow officer committed to protecting innocent life. Thank you, Commander. Welcome to the Coalition. Now, let's save the galaxy. The final battle for the galaxy's soul began not with the clash of fleets, but with a simple message broadcast across every inhabited world in known space. Admiral Chun stood before the combined crews of the Coalition fleet, human and alien faces side by side, as she delivered what would later be remembered as the Declaration of Galactic Freedom. People of the galaxy, her voice carried across thousands of worlds through hijacked Dominion communication networks. Today we stand at a crossroads between 2 futures. One path leads to an empire built on fear, where diversity is seen as weakness and freedom is sacrificed for the illusion of order. The other leads to a coalition of free worlds, where every species has the right to determine its own destiny. Zexthera watched from the bridge of his ship, now flying in formation with human vessels, as the message continued. Around him, his crew, those who had chosen to remain, worked alongside human technical specialists to integrate their weapons systems with coalition targeting networks. The Dominion has chosen genocide over acceptance, annihilation over adaptation, Admiral Chen continued. But we have chosen differently. We choose hope over fear, diversity over uniformity, freedom over submission. Today, we fight not just for our own survival, but for the right of every being in the galaxy to live as they choose. The message cut to strategic displays showing the massive Dominion fleet approaching human space. 60,000 ships in perfect formation, carrying enough firepower to crack planets and boil away atmospheres. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, commanded by Supreme Admiral Kexthul personally. Sir, Lieutenant Kavlos reported from his station, we're receiving updated tactical data from Coalition intelligence. The Dominion fleet is larger than initially estimated, closer to 70,000 ships. Zexthera nodded grimly. Against such numbers, even the expanded Coalition fleet of 25,000 vessels seemed insignificant. But numbers weren't everything, as the humans had already proven. Commander, came Admiral Chen's voice over the communication system. We're ready to begin final coordination. Your knowledge of Dominion battle doctrine will be crucial to our success. Zexthera moved to the tactical display, where holographic representations of both fleets appeared in 3-dimensional space. The human command structure was unlike anything he had experienced. Instead of rigid hierarchies, they operated as interconnected networks where information flowed freely and decisions could be made at any level. The Dominion will approach in traditional formation, Zexthera explained to the mixed human and alien command staff. Heavy battleships in the center, fast attack vessels on the flanks, with command ships positioned for maximum protection. They'll attempt to overwhelm our defenses through concentrated firepower. And their typical response to asymmetric tactics? Asked Captain Rodriguez, the human officer who had first convinced Subcommander Veltar to defect. Confusion, then overcompensation, Zexthera replied. Dominion commanders are trained to expect predictable enemy behavior. When faced with tactics outside their doctrine, they typically respond by committing reserves prematurely. Admiral Chun studied the tactical projection with the focused intensity that Zexthera had learned to recognize as distinctly human. Then, we give them confusion. Captain Rodriguez, initiate the Trojan Protocol. Zextara watched in fascination as coalition ships began to disperse throughout the system in patterns that seemed random, but clearly served a purpose he didn't yet understand. Ships of different species mixed freely, their diverse technologies creating a symphony of capabilities that no single species could have achieved alone. "Admiral," Zextara said, "what is the Trojan Protocol?" Admiral Chun smiled with the expression he had learned meant humans were about to do something impossible. "Commander, how much do you know about human mythology?" "Very little, I'm afraid. The original Trojan horse was a gift that concealed warriors inside. The enemy thought they were receiving a tribute, but they were actually opening their gates to invasion." She gestured to the tactical display. "We're going to give the Dominion exactly what they expect, a desperate last stand by inferior forces. What they won't see coming is what we've hidden inside that apparent desperation." The first phase of the battle began 18 hours later, when the Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Zextara had to admit that the sight was awe-inspiring. 70,000 warships moving as one, their weapons already charging for the opening bombardment. Supreme Admiral Kexthal's image appeared on every coalition ship's communication system, his reptilian features twisted with arrogance and contempt. "Rebels and primitives," his voice boomed across space. "You have chosen to defy the natural order of the galaxy. Today you will learn the price of that defiance." Admiral Chin's response was calm and measured. "Supreme Admiral Kexthal, you have committed your fleet to the murder of billions of innocent beings. We cannot allow that to happen." "You cannot stop it," Kexthal replied. "Your pathetic alliance will be swept away like debris before the storm of Imperial might. Surrender now, and I may allow some of your species to survive as slaves." "We respectfully decline," Admiral Chin said, and Zextara heard something in her voice that made his scales tingle with anticipation. "All coalition ships, execute Phoenix Rising." What happened next redefined Zextara's understanding of what was possible in space combat. The scattered coalition ships suddenly revealed themselves to be far more numerous than the Dominion had detected. Stealth fields dropped away, revealing vessels hidden in asteroid belts, gas clouds, and what had appeared to be empty space. But the real surprise came when the inferior ships began to demonstrate capabilities that should have been impossible. Carillion vessels that had seemed to be simple transports suddenly unveiled weapons systems that fired in perfect coordination with ships light years away. Zephyrian crystal ships began to phase in and out of normal space, appearing behind Dominion lines before vanishing again. Mollusk vessels moved through space as if it were an ocean, flowing around enemy formations with impossible grace. "Ow!" Kexthal demanded over the communication channel, his composure beginning to crack as his perfect battle plan disintegrated. "These are primitive species. They lack the technology for such coordination." "You're right," Admiral Chin replied. "Individually, none of these species could challenge your empire. But, you see, Supreme Admiral, you never understood the difference between conquest and cooperation. You took their technologies and used them as tools. We gave them back their freedom and let them innovate. The battle became a three-dimensional chess game played across light years of space. The Dominion fleet, for all its size and power, was designed for conventional warfare against conventional enemies. The coalition fought like a living organism, with each ship type contributing its unique capabilities while adapting to threats in real time. Zextara found himself commanding a mixed squadron of former Dominion and coalition vessels, their crews working together with an efficiency that should have taken years to develop. Human tactical flexibility, combined with alien technological diversity, created combinations that neither side could have achieved alone. "Commander," reported his new tactical officer, a human named Sarah Kim, "the Dominion is attempting to break through our left flank. They're concentrating their heavy battleships for a massive push." "Understood," Zextara replied, then activated his squadron communication system. "All ships, prepare for Maneuver 7. Our mollusk vessels will create a gravity well to slow their approach," Zephyrian ships will use phase shifting to attack from unexpected angles, and human ships will coordinate the targeting solutions. The maneuver worked perfectly, but what amazed Zexthera was how naturally the different species worked together. The mollusk engineering precision combined with human tactical innovation and Zephyrian spatial manipulation to create a defense that the Dominion couldn't counter. As the battle progressed, it became clear that the Dominion's advantage in numbers was being negated by the Coalition's advantage in adaptability. Every time Kexthol's forces developed a counter to Coalition tactics, new innovations would appear that forced them to start over. But the turning point came when something unprecedented happened. Individual Dominion ships began to defect during the battle itself. Admiral Chun came a transmission from a Dominion cruiser. "This is Captain Felnara of the Imperial Justice. My crew and I request permission to join the Coalition forces." "Permission granted," Admiral Chun replied immediately. "Transmit your position and we'll provide escort." Within minutes, dozens of similar transmissions began flooding the communication channels. Dominion crews who had witnessed the battle, seen the cooperation between species they had been taught to view as inferior slaves, were making the same choice Zexthera had made days earlier. Supreme Admiral Kexthol's rage was visible even across the vast distances of space. "Traitors, all ships, fire on any vessel attempting to defect. I will not tolerate cowardice in the ranks." But the order only accelerated the defections. Dominion crews who might have hesitated to abandon their posts had no such reluctance about escaping commanders who would murder them for making moral choices. The final phase of the battle began when Admiral Chun activated what she called the Revelation Protocol. Every defecting Dominion ship began broadcasting the same materials Zexthera had reviewed during the ceasefire, the authentic historical records showing what the Dominion had really done to conquered species. Across the Dominion fleet, crews who had never questioned their orders suddenly found themselves confronting the truth about their empire. The psychological impact was devastating. Entire squadrons stopped fighting as their crews demanded explanations from their commanders. "This is impossible," Kexthol raged over the command channel. "You cannot turn an empire against itself with mere propaganda." "It's not propaganda," Admiral Chun replied. "It's truth. And truth, Supreme Admiral, is the one weapon your empire never learned to defend against." The end came not with a massive explosion or climactic duel, but with a simple message transmitted from the bridge of Kexthol's own flagship. Sub-Admiral Korthes, the Supreme Admiral's own second-in-command, appeared on the communication channel with obvious regret in his voice. "Supreme Admiral Kexthol," Korthes said, "by the authority granted to me under Imperial Military Code Section 12-7, I am relieving you of command for ordering the illegal execution of Imperial personnel and planning genocide in violation of galactic law." Kexthol's roar of fury echoed across space, but it was the last sound a galaxy would hear from him as Supreme Admiral. Within hours, the remaining Dominion fleet had surrendered, their crews demanding the right to review the historical evidence and make their own choices about the future. Standing on his bridge 3 days later, Zexthera watched as the last of the Dominion command structure formally surrendered. The galaxy's largest empire had fallen not to superior firepower, but to something much simpler, the desire of sentient beings to be free. "Commander," Admiral Chun said, appearing on his communication screen, "we're organizing reconstruction committees for liberated worlds. We could use experienced officers who understand both Imperial administration and coalition principles." Zexthera looked around his bridge at the mixed crew of humans and aliens working side by side, then at the tactical display showing coalition ships escorting former enemies to refugee centers and medical facilities. "Admiral," he replied, "I believe I'm ready to learn what reconstruction actually means." As he spoke, Zexthera realized that his memoirs would have a different ending than he had expected when this all began. The day humans arrived, he had indeed lost everything. Every certainty, every assumption, every justification for the life he had lived. But In losing everything, he had gained something infinitely more valuable, the chance to build something better. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in 3 centuries, that was exactly what it needed.